I have a few letters that some children wrote to God. They're all brief, just a sentence or two. Let me read them to you. Dear God, are you real? Some people don't believe it. If you are, you better do something quick. Signed, Harriet Ann. Dear God, I wrote to you before. Do you remember? Well, I did what I promised, but you did not send me that pony yet. How about it? Signed, Lewis. Dear God, what is it like to die? No one will tell me. I just want to know. I don't want to do it. Signed, your friend Mike. Dear God, instead of letting people die and having to make new ones, why don't you just keep the ones you've got now? Signed, Jane. Dear God, could you write some more stories? We've already read all the ones you've written so far and have begun again. Gratefully, Emily. Dear God, I bet it is very hard for you to love all of everyone in the whole world. There are only 4 people in our family, and I can never do it. Signed, Man. Dear God, are boys better than girls? I know you are one, but try to be fair. Sylvia. In today's gospel, Jesus says, "Let the little children come to me. Do not stop them, for it is to such as these that the kingdom of God belongs. Truly I tell you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God as a little child will never enter it." This is an extremely well-known statement, which has led to endless speculation and a great deal of sentimentalizing of children. And yet, as we can see from the letters I just read, when it comes to religion, children have many similarities with adults. Harriet Ann, for example, like many adults, is not entirely sure that God is real. Lewis, too, shares the widespread adult trait of hoping to bargain with God for favors. I mean, who of us has not sometimes rather promised God that we will definitely give up some bad habit or other if only God will give us what we want now? Then there's Mike, wondering what happens after death, and Jane, who wonders why people have to die at all. Do any of us ever stop asking these questions? And what about Nan, asking how God can love everyone in the world when she has such a hard time loving the 4 people in her family? She's touching on a doubt that goes very, very deep. And finally, there's Sylvia, wondering if she is really valued, asking who's better, boys or girls, not sure that God, who she sees as male, can be fair, not realizing that God is actually a woman, so of course girls are better. Are any of these concerns all that much different from those of their mature counterparts? Not really. So what's Jesus getting at here? The thing is, children aren't the only ones who Jesus holds up as someone to emulate if we wish to enter the kingdom of God. He says the same thing about the poor. Just think of Luke 6:20. Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Or his advice to the young man in Mark 10:22. He tells him that the way to the kingdom is to sell all he owns, give the money to the poor, and follow him. Then too, there's Jesus' injunction in Matthew chapter 6, not to worry about your life, but instead to look to the birds of the air and consider the lilies of the field. as a way to strive for the kingdom of God. The question is, what do these two things have in common? How is childhood like being poor? Well, if you think about it, both involve powerlessness. So both require trust. With the poor, trust does not come naturally. In fact, I strongly suspect that what is most difficult about poverty is not so much its deprivation, it's the uncertainty, the disquiet, the anxiety, the worry. I mean, I've gone through stretches of my life where I have been quite poor myself, and that's what I couldn't take. It wasn't so much what I didn't have that got to me. It was all those nights laying awake, fretting over how I was going to meet the bills for that month. The twist in the gut I got as I tried to decide how much food I could afford to put in my shopping cart. The anxiety I experienced every time a child got a little fever, knowing how devastating medical costs could be. All this was what poverty meant to me. At such times, I found it impossible to look to the birds of the air or consider the lily of the fields. And yet I could do that as a child. Looking back on it, I realized that when I was very young, my family had very little money at all. At the time, my dad was a graduate student who supported us teaching at a tiny church-related college. If I remember correctly, he had a monthly salary of $90 a month, which was small even for the early 50s. We lived in a tiny 4-room house, well, a shack really, which my mother somehow managed to keep spotless. It had a living room, 1 bedroom, bath, and a kitchen. My uncle slept on the living room couch, and I in a small bed squeezed in my parents' room. Since my dad was working according to an academic schedule, for several of those years, we gave up the house every summer to save money and drove from Southern California, where we lived, to Ohio to live with my grandparents. I don't really know how my parents managed it. But that's the point. I was just a child. I never gave it a moment's thought. I never thought, and I never worried. I never questioned a thing. I simply went with the flow. We lived on top of each other. We ate simple, frugal meals. We packed up every June and unpacked again every September. Did this seem strange to me? Did it seem hard? No. It was just how things were. I was a child. I took it all in stride. I accepted it all. It was just my life, and I was content. I was at peace. Years later, as an adult, I would lay awake at night wondering how I was going to make ends meet for my own family. And I would think of that time and realize that never since then have I been as wealthy as I was during that period when my family had almost nothing. All because as a child, I lived in a world of total trust. I simply took things as they came and trusted that it would all be okay. That's what the world of childhood is like. A child asks for so little. Everything else they just accept as it comes, whatever it is. A child never has to pray, "Thy will be done." For them, as long as they receive their daily bread, what is always fine with them. Unless concretely proved otherwise, they simply trust that they will be taken care of. They just let it happen. If you think about it, That really is the kingdom of God. So what about us adults? Is such a reality available to us, demanding as we are, jaded as we are? Not without God's help. And yet I believe that when we ask for help, there is just one thing we need to pray for. It's trust. Total trust. The trust known so well by birds of the air, and the trust of the lilies of the field. The trust known so well by small children. All of these know without having been told that they are not in charge. And yet, all simply let go of that, accepting all that comes their way, certain that even if one thing or another is not to their liking, it will be well, and all will be well, and all manner of things will be well, because God is in charge. Amen.